All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Commanders Film Room, where we follow the all 22 of the Washington Commanders every Wednesday around 4 o'clock. We're here for a special edition, a snow day edition here in the DMV with our days off with our blizzard. Hopefully, you guys are staying warm and at home. Hopefully, you guys are at safe and back home, kind of taking it easy here. I'm one of your hosts, George Carmy. You can find me at gcarmy21. My co-host, Mark Bullock. You can follow him on Twitter at Mark Bullock NFL. He leads an awesome Substack on Mark Bullock's Film Room. You should definitely check that out, the written work and the video work over there as well. Welcome to our Daronte Jones episode, Mark. We're going to break down the new defensive coordinator here over in DC. Let me throw the first question out before we get to the film work. Washington, it's been kind of a drawn-out process, maybe about 2 weeks, I believe, about interviewing about 9 different candidates of various experience level. Early on in the process, there was a conversation about, hey, we want to experience DC. We want someone where Dan Quinn could be hands off on the defense. We went through 9 different candidates and landed on Daronte Jones, the former pass coordinator from the Minnesota Vikings. I'm curious. You and I talked offline. I know what your thoughts are, but I'm curious for the fan base. What are your thoughts on Daronte Jones? Or do you think he's a good match here in DC? And what are your thoughts on the fit?
Yeah, out of the guys that they interviewed, once it became apparent that a guy like Brian Flores wasn't going to be available, getting his right-hand man in Jones felt like one of the probably better options. And obviously at this point last week, he wasn't even on the table or on the radar because they hadn't interviewed him. And at that point, it was like, do you go with a young, unproven guy in Carl Scott, or do you try one of the retreads like a Patrick Graham or Denard Wilson or what have you? So I feel better about them trying something new. It would have been a lot less risky to go down the kind of retread path. So, it is risky for Dan Quinn going into a crucial year 3 to go in this path. So I commend him for that. And I appreciate that that's a bold move for him to do, but I prefer that, trying something different, and at least going out with a bang if it could work or it could not. But I'd at least rather him try something different than go back to a retread. So I out of the options that they kind of interviewed, and once it came apparent that a guy like Brian Flores wasn't going to end up here, then Jones felt like probably one of the better options available. Yeah,
I agree. Thank you, Fix the Defense, for joining the show. We're definitely going to talk about fixing the damn defense today in our show today. Shots by Sean, DMV. Thank you for checking us out. We do a film every Wednesday, so I'm glad you're here. Going back to Daronte Jones, Mark, I agree with you. I do like the upside of Jones because he has a pretty stark and pretty impressive pedigree, right? Working with Vic Fangio over in Miami, working with Mike Zimmer back in Minnesota in 2022. And he's not necessarily Brian Flores, but he's Brian Flores' right-hand man in Minnesota right now. So he has been exposed to that aggressive defense that many of us kind of fell in love with over the past couple of weeks. That being said, there is kind of a contrast between Dan Quinn's style and with Daronte Jones' style and Brian Flores' style. Dan Quinn stereotypically had a cover 3 over in Seattle. He tried to bring over some man coverage concepts over here in DC, but injuries, scheme, confusion, youth, a lot of different factors kind of came into play where it didn't necessarily work. I'm curious, do you think that it'll be kind of a seamless transition? What do you envision Daronte Jones's defense going to be? That's going to be the crux of our video concept today.
Yeah, it's. I think it'll be quite the change, which makes the move even more bold from Dan Quinn to go away from what he traditionally has done. But he's always talked about how the game is always evolving and how you have to evolve with it as a coach. And he's talked about how he had his cover 3 stuff with Seattle and he took that to Atlanta, but by the time he was done in Atlanta, that cover 3 stuff was being kind of figured out and they needed to evolve. And so he went to Dallas and they went much more man heavy and tried to bring that to Washington. And obviously they had some issues with that from a personnel standpoint and what have you. And they've struggled. So this possibly represents the next evolution of what a Dan Quinn defense is. But I like that he is going outside the box. He's trying something very different from what he is. I think there will be a significant amount of change. There obviously needed to be, given how bad the defense has been the past 2 years. But they could have easily gone down the path of, maybe promote Ken Norton from their own staff who had defensive coordinator experience before, who knows Dan Quinn, and tried to stick with the same kind of schemes and just try to sort of rearrange the chairs and hope that that improved. Or they could make this kind of bold move and not necessarily completely start from scratch, but make significant changes. And so I think that's what we'll see with Jones coming in. So one of those first changes as we jump into the film here is the Vikings play more of a base 3-4 defense. In the modern NFL, you don't see too many teams be base 3-4 or base 4-3. You typically see most teams end up in nickel, and that's what a lot of teams call their base defense nowadays. So the distinction between a 3-4 and a 4-3 is more blurry than it ever has been. But the Vikings are one of the few teams that they play a 3-4 and they show that front very frequently, and they will play a base defense quite a lot. And even when they're in nickel, as we'll see in some of these clips in a minute, you'll see the kind of remnants of what looks like a 3-4, just with different personnel. And for Washington, this shouldn't be a huge transition because we saw some of these looks from Washington this year. Even though they were a 4-3 defense, technically, they did quite a lot of this kind of slanting the defense inside. And what you can see from this look from the Vikings is you have 3 defensive linemen on the field. So for Washington, this would be, Johnny Newton, Javon Kinlaw, and Daron Payne, or maybe Eddie Goldman in at the nose tackle spot. And then you'd have one outside linebacker, which might be a Dorrance Armstrong, a specialist outside linebacker who would technically be a defensive end. And then you might get Frankie Louvu lining up on this edge, right? And we saw that quite a lot from Washington, where it was technically 4 down linemen with 1 linebacker on the edge. Whereas here, it's the same front, it's the same look. It's just, instead of having Dorrance Armstrong with his hand in the dirt counting as a defensive end here, they have Andrew Van Ginkel, who's a stand-up outside linebacker, and this guy is an outside linebacker rather than being a traditional linebacker like a Frankie Louvu. And then you got your 2 inside linebackers. So this is a very traditional, typical 3-4. And that's what you see from here on this play, where you got 2 tight ends. It's a 12 personnel, and something you saw from Washington last year was they tried to match up 12 personnel with a nickel defense. The Vikings under Flores and Jones didn't do that very often. They if they did, they would go big nickel rather than a normal nickel, but they would quite happily sit in a base defense where it's your basic 3-4. And we can run this play through and see that they defend this run pretty well. You get a really quick fill from this linebacker attacking aggressively. You get the nose tackle beating a down block on this kind of counter scheme, and that means that the running back has nowhere really to go. He wants to hit this lane behind this puller, but the linebacker fits aggressively, and that means he has to cut back into this nose tackle that's won his block, and they get nothing on that play. But that's more just to show what that kind of front looks like. Then we have a kind of a big nickel version of that. So this is probably more reminiscent of what we saw from Washington last year, where it's still that 3-man front, or they want to call it a 5-man front if you include the 2 edge rushers or 2 edge defenders. But this time you still got 3 defensive tackles, you've got 1 of the outside linebackers, and then you rotate 1 of your inside linebackers down to the edge. So think of Frankie Louvu, for example, for Washington. That would essentially be what we've seen from Washington this year. And then you would have had a Bobby Wagner here, and then maybe a Jeremy Reeves or Will Harris would be the extra safety down in the box playing as a linebacker. But that's essentially what they get to here. So this is one of their big nickel packages where they keep their 3 defensive linemen on the field. They want those guys to help them stop the run. They take out one of the linebackers and outside linebackers, and they put one of their inside linebackers on the edge. And that gives them better run support. They bring the safety down into the box, but you can see they still have the other 2 safeties back deep. That's another thing that is very common for this defense, is they have their 2 safeties back deep. They don't, very rarely do they stack the box with multiple all their safeties in the box and just play a single high defense. They typically operate out of 2 high. So that's another thing. Now, when you get into a kind of front like this, especially with this particular look, the Eagles especially could see hang on, we've got an outside linebacker, and then we've got a safety in the boxes playing as a linebacker. This is a nice look for us to run on. And it is, you've got a safety playing as a linebacker. That's kind of a matchup you want to run on. So they run to the left here. But what the Vikings do is they know that, hey, we've got to try to protect this guy in the box as playing as a linebacker when he's actually a safety. So they run a run stunt. So you see this defensive tackle stunts inside towards the center. You see this edge rusher stunts inside towards the left guard. And then you get the somewhat easier assignment for the nickel defender to, or the safety to kind of scrape to the edge and just kind of set the edge. And what you see when we roll this through is they stunt inside, and the Eagles don't handle the stunt well. The nose tackle does a really nice job driving back the center. The edge rusher stunts inside, and the left guard kind of struggles to pick him up. And they both penetrate, and then it doesn't really matter what's happening on the edge from this nickel guy, because you've got penetration from the stunts inside, and Saquon Barkley gets wrapped up for no gain.
And Mark, not to interrupt you right there. It seems like you have to play very disciplined football in regard to that, because looking at the numbers, I believe that the Eagles had an extra tackle in at that position and a tight end as well. So they, in theory, had a very beefy lineup that could eat up a 3-4, but they're still disruptive there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that the Vikings try to do is you'll see they very often keep these three interior defensive linemen on the field. So they keep those three big guys to try to help them stop the run, and they are very good at defending the run. So even when they get into the sort of different personnel, like this one is another version of a big nickel personnel. Last time we saw them have two inside linebackers, but walked one down to the edge, and still three safeties. This time you get your two outside linebackers and your one inside linebacker. So you could technically call this a 3-3-3 defense, where you have your three defensive linemen, your three linebackers, and then your three safeties behind it. It depends it all depends on whether you classify these outside linebackers as edge defenders, which you call down linemen essentially. So then you could call it a 5-man front, but you could also call it a 3-man front. But when teams go into nickel, typically they will take one of these interior defensive linemen off the field for their nickel player. So in that case, that would be the safety, and then you'd have two interior defensive linemen, two edge guys, two linebackers, or a nickel, right? So what the Vikings do is because they do so many different stunts and stuff, they want these three big interior defensive linemen on the field. That allows them to keep their safeties back deep, play too high, and get into different personnel groups and still be able to defend the run as well as they do. And again, to protect the fact that they've got three safeties on the field and two back deep, they run a little stunt up front here, where you'll see this time the defensive tackle over the right tackle, he's going to loop inside to the A gap. You're going to have the one remaining inside linebacker scrape around him to the edge to fill his gap on the edge. And then you're going to have this safety step up from deep to fill the role of the inside linebacker. So they're still going to get essentially the same look in the end, where they've got guys up front and sort of a 3-4 in the end, but they get to it from a different way, and they stunt their front around. And what you'll see again is that stunt works incredibly well, and the right guard struggles to pick up that stunt. He's focused too much on the linebacker, when really that should be the right tackle's job, and the defensive tackle is left free to go and make the play. But even if he wasn't, you've now got the safety running down into it, and he's essentially a linebacker at this point to help fill the lane as well. And that helps them stop the run. So
I love it. It's very like exotic, very mobile. Like, it's very multiple, right? You can do a lot of different things from those different types of sets. It's really interesting. My one question, Mark, sorry to interrupt you. Do you think as of right now, do we have the personnel for that? Because I'm seeing those big 3-man fronts, and I'm envisioning maybe Kinlaw, Daronte, and Goldman. I kind of see Johnny Newton as the odd man out. Like, I don't know if that's like he's a little bit smaller. Like, I know he's more of a passive rusher. I don't know if he's a stout run defender. I don't know if do you think Washington has the personnel currently right now to potentially run this? That's a hard question to ask. I'm sorry.
No, it's a fair question, and I think they do, because they were doing this kind of stuff pretty often throughout this season anyway. Like, when they wanted to stop the run, they would play those three. As you mentioned, it was mainly Payne, Goldman, and Kinlaw, and Goldman would be the nose tackle. He's obviously a free agent, so we'll see whether he comes back. He would make some sense to bring back in this scheme, but he's obviously 32 or something at this point, so you might want to get younger. But you don't always have that luxury to get younger. But I think Newton can work because if you're, let's go back to the look we were just on, the base.
And Monty, I see your question. I'm going to ask it to Mark in a second.
So if we see this kind of sort of a basic 3-4 kind of look where you have your two inside linebackers, your outside linebackers, when you think of a Johnny Newton who is a little bit lighter, if he's playing what would be a 3-4 defensive end, which is kind of a 5 technique, head up over the tackle, he's mostly playing the B gap at that point. And Newton is a little bit lighter, and you would want, if you're in a world where this linebacker is dropping out into coverage, you want that defensive tackle to be light enough to be able to, play on the edge and contain on the edge, which Johnny Newton is. But you also, if you're blitzing, if you rush all 5 of these guys, your edge rushers are taking the right tackle, and that gives your defensive end here a really good angle against the right guard to penetrate and work into the backfield and pass rush. So that would really suit a guy like Johnny Newton, who is, as you said, more of a pass rush kind of guy. So I think this could be a role that works for him. Ideally, you'd like to see him just play as a 3 tech, but you can slant the front to make him play as a 3 technique, where he's sat in between, or more on the outside shoulder of the guard rather than head up on the tackle. But those are kind of finer details that you can work out. I do think if you get into these 3-man fronts, that does present more opportunities. Because last year he was kind of just buried behind, it was 2 defensive tackles, it was Kinlaw and Payne, and then when those guys needed a break, it'd be Golden coming in at one and Newton coming in at the other. So if you're playing 3, there's more opportunities for him. So
that makes sense. And then I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mark, but Monty asked a question. He said, does this mean that because, with this whole 3-4 potential front that Washington could potentially run, is this something where we'd be looking more for a stand-up edge more than a hand in the dirt kind of edge player?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be certainly something that they would need. And actually, I was going to make the point here with Andrew Van Ginkel when we sort of transition into coverage is they do blitz a lot, and we'll get into some of that stuff. But when you talk about those outside linebackers, the kind of 3-4 outside linebackers, the versatility that they look for in those guys, Andrew Van Ginkel makes this whole scheme work because he is just as comfortable dropping back into coverage as he is rushing. And when you think about how the Vikings like to blitz a lot, they quite often will bring a guy, for example, let's say this linebacker joins the rush on the right side of the offensive line. They will then have the edge rusher, so the outside linebacker on the other side, drop off into coverage to replace him. So Andrew Van Ginkel is someone that quite often, rather than rushing, ends up dropping into coverage. So you need that guy to be capable of standing up and dropping into coverage and being not just solid in coverage, but good in coverage, because they will do it a fair amount. Now you can get away with having one kind of star edge rusher that you use more frequently because they very rarely drop both guys into coverage. It's usually Van Ginkel that drops if they're going to drop one. So you can get kind of essentially your 3 defensive tackles and 1 edge rusher that is kind of a normal, you could call it a 4-3 defensive end. He would be technically standing up as a 3-4 outside linebacker in this scheme. But you will, at some point, you're going to need someone like a Van Ginkel that is capable of dropping into coverage. So I think the profile that they'll be looking for is more of that 3-4 outside linebacker, that kind of stand-up guy, maybe a little bit more athletic, maybe a little bit lighter than a heavier guy, and someone that has that ability to drop in coverage.
And for those of you guys that are looking at number 7, right now my early research is Sonny Styles would be a very good fit for that right there. He formerly played a nickelback his freshman and sophomore year at Ohio State. He transitioned to linebacker his last year. He's very, very athletic. I can see him kind of playing that role potentially, but still early in the process.
Yeah, I haven't studied many of the draft prospects yet, so I couldn't tell you who would be a great fit for that at this point. But certainly as we get closer to the draft, we'll do some film pieces on those guys and look for who might fit that profile. So yeah, as we've kind of looked at the fronts there and what you might see kind of a transition to 3-4. So the next thing to look at is what kind of base coverages do they use. And we know that the thing with a Brian Flores defense is they like to blitz, and they blitz a lot. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think I saw somewhere that they on first down blitzed something like 48% of the time, and on second down they blitzed like 49% of the time. So basically half the time on first and second down they were blitzing. I think the next highest team was like in the sort of late 30s. So nobody was even close to the amount of blitzing that they do on first and second down. And when you blitz a ton, typically from an offensive perspective, when you have a defense that's blitzing you, you associate that with man coverage. And that just comes from when you think of a zone defense, you think of 7 guys dropping into coverage, playing different zones, right? And if you were to suddenly lose one of these guys, the distribution of the zones wouldn't work so well. So you'd have to typically play some sort of man coverage if you're going to blitz a fifth defender. So offensively, you're thinking, I'm getting a blitz, they're going to be playing man coverage of some sort. Where's my best man matchup? But what the Vikings do is they do a lot of zone blitzing. They don't play a lot of man coverage at all. They play mostly zone coverages. And I think this is where you will see the bigger imprint from Jones compared to Flores. Like the blitzing stuff, that's all Flores, and hopefully that will have rubbed off on Jones somewhat. But the zone coverage and the match stuff that we're about to see is, I think, coming from Jones and his background, where he worked with Vance Joseph quite a lot as he was kind of a young and up-and-coming coach. And Vance Joseph has kind of implemented one of the best zone match defenses in the NFL now. So I think that's kind of what we've seen in Minnesota for the last few years has been kind of a really good marriage between Flores' blitz schemes and Jones's zone match schemes. So what we'll see when they're not blitzing is a lot of quarters concepts, and this one is part quarters. This one's what you would call cover 6. So you've got your 3-4 front, your base defense in against 11 personnel. So as I talked about, they will play their base defense where you got your 2 linebackers, your 2 outside linebackers, your 3 defensive linemen, even though they've only got 1 tight end. I think this is a receiver and 2 receivers out here. So they're in base defense against 11 personnel. Normally most teams will go nickel. But a guy like Van Ginkel gives you that flexibility because he's capable of dropping into coverage, and then you can just run your front 4. And what they play is cover 6. So cover 6 is a split coverage. And if you just draw a line straight down the middle of the field here, you'll see that this half of the defense is playing effectively quarters coverage. So this safety is playing a deep quarter. This corner is going to drop back and play a deep quarter. And then this linebacker is going to play what's called a quarter flat. So they're responsible for the flat, but they're responsible for quite a lot of distance because it's a quarters flat rather than a cover 3 flat. On this side of the field, you've got a cover 2. So you've got this safety is going to play a deep half, and then you're going to play your typical cover 2 to this side where you've got 3 underneath defenders playing different your flat and your hook curls and stuff like that. And Van Ginkel is going to be dropping into that part and playing zone defense that way. So that's how you get to this, and you play, as I say, it's cover 4 or quarters to this half and cover 2 to this half. So you call that cover 6 because it's cover 4 plus cover 2, right? Very complicated things in the NFL, you know. So that's what you see here. And the thing to notice is that they do a lot of these kind of quarters and match concepts. And you'll see it as you run through here that they drop back into their zones. And you can see how it distributes out. You've got your cover 2 stuff going this way. You got the safety getting deep over the top of the deep half. You got your safety on this side of the field holding his position because he's only responsible for a quarter rather than sinking to a deep half. This corner is sinking back to his quarter, but because he sees these guys both going underneath, he doesn't need to go too deep because he's got no threats to him really. And then you see you've got your quarters distribution to this side, quarter and a flat defender, and then you got your cover 2 to this side where you've got your 3 underneath guys and you're deep over the top. So you get some nice coverage. They distribute quite well to whatever route combination that the Bears are running here, and Caleb Williams gets kind of panicked in the pocket when he doesn't find an open target and ends up scrambling, nearly gets sacked and finds a check down, but they don't get much from it. But that's a look at a kind of quarter half or cover 6. What they will also do is a lot of base quarters and match quarters, and they will do zone blitzing quarters. So what you'll see here is you've got this is a nickel personnel, so you've got just 4 guys on the defensive front, but they will blitz a 5th guy. And you'll quite often see in the NFL that when you blitz a 5th guy, teams will do a zone blitz, and it's also known as fire zones. And you'll see typically it will be some sort of 3 deep, 3 underneath, kind of a very even distribution. What the Vikings do is quite different. They will do a match quarters version of this, where typically in quarters you would have 4 deep defenders and then 3 underneath. They are dropping one of their underneath guys and they're letting him go and rush. But what they know when this guy's going to blitz, and we'll come to the blitz part of this in a minute, is they're going to get the back forced to stay in to protect, which means there's only going to be 2 receivers on this side and 2 receivers on this side and no third option. And so what they're going to get is they're going to play a match coverage where they're going to play triangles, and you're going to see it. I'll let it play out here because I'm pretty sure I drew it up. Yeah, here we go. So you're going to see triangle 3 over 2. So you get a triangle here where you get the safety, the corner, and the linebacker, where you got 3 over 2, and you get the same thing here: safety, corner, linebacker, 3 over 2, and they basically pass off routes based on how the routes distribute. So you can see initially here, this corner is covering this outside receiver. As this receiver breaks over towards the middle of the field, he passes them off for the safety, and the safety is going to drive down on it. Now, when you think of a traditional blitz, as I talked about earlier, when you see the 5th man rushing, the quarterback typically associates that with man coverage. So if he's looking out here and seeing this corner playing so far off, he's thinking, I've got a nice easy throw over the middle here. If you associate it with a typical zone blitz, it would be 3 deep, 3 underneath. So you'd normally have a zone defender underneath it and a zone defender over the top of it. But what you can see is open field in the middle of the field. So he thinks he's got this throwing window. And that's why this safety is then able to drive down on this throw and break it up before I think that's AJ Brown is able to make the pass. So that's it can get into very complex levels of detail with those kind of match coverages. There's a lot of different rules involved in that, and we could sit here for hours talking about those kind of match coverages.
I was going to ask you a question whenever you're ready for it. I don't know if you're ready for it.
Yeah, if you want to go back to, if you want to talk about the match coverages, you go ahead.
That's exactly what I was going to ask. So for one, this seems like a very complex type of defense, which I find very interesting and find very, it's very moldable as well. I think Washington really needs to focus on their communication next year to make sure that this works, right? It's all about communication, passing off to your defenders. You got to be very disciplined to do this. I guess my most salient question would be, what is, I keep hearing match coverage, and my assumption is you're playing zone. Someone comes across the middle and comes across you jump, and you have actually become a man defender at that point. You attach to him at that point, that you are connected. Is that the difference between a regular zone and a zone match? Is that just kind of clarifying that component?
Yeah. So if we go back to the previous play, the previous play was a cover 6, but it was a spot drop cover 6. So this would be what would be a traditional zone, where you see these guys are responsible for a single zone, and they will just drop to their landmarks, and then their eyes will be on the quarterback. So you see that here. These guys are all just going to drop to those landmarks in their zone coverage, right? They drop to their landmarks, and you can see them very clearly in there. There's 4 guys underneath. There's quarters on this side. There's the safety back deep playing the deep half on this side. So they're just playing their zones, and they've got their vision on the quarterback there. They're all facing the quarterback. Their all eyes are on there. Whereas when we skip this forward to, let it just run through. When we skip this forward to this match coverage, what you'll see is these guys drop back towards their zones, but look at where all their eyes are. Their eyes are reading these receivers, right? You can see these guys, they're not looking at the quarterback. They're all reading the distribution of these routes, because their coverage works depends on where these routes go. So if this guy breaks out suddenly, then this outside cornerback that would typically be thinking of covering the outside receiver has to then adjust his coverage to match that guy breaking outside. So it's all about the distribution of routes and which route you're reading the releases of the receivers and then matching your coverage to the most appropriate receiver as those routes distribute. So you can see, here you've got this guy breaking underneath. So obviously the inside guy that's trying to wall off this area attaches to that. And that means you've essentially got a bracket on this outside receiver. So you've got this guy, if AJ Brown breaks outside, you've got the corner on that. If he breaks inside, the safety then drives on it, as we saw. And the same thing at the bottom here, where they're reading the receivers and they're matching the coverage based on that. So it's rather than just dropping to a certain landmark and then having vision on the quarterback and kind of feeling if a guy's near you and kind of shuffling in your zone, but kind of staying in your zone. These guys are reading the receivers rather than the quarterback, and they're looking for who's breaking where and which route is going to be the most appropriate one for them to match to.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
Thank you for breaking that down. I appreciate that.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually have 2 questions. I don't know if you are ready
Sure.
for that.
Good.
So for one, yeah, Sean, I completely agree. It seems like a pretty complex, and we kind of talked about it already. But do you think our defenders could possibly pick this up? And I think Mark kind of broke that down. And this is the more complex question from Eastwood. Mark, could you see Jones keeping the same 4-3 structure up front, but adding some more mug double looks and sims to create easier pressure while modernizing the coverage into more man match and quarter stuff?
Yeah, I don't know if they'll get too much into man match. That wasn't something that they did. Not man match. They did zone matching. They could look to keep a 4-3 defense. Like Jones came up under guys like Mike Zimmer and Vance Joseph who run 4-3 stuff. And as I said last year, Washington ran a 4-3, but they just shifted the front, and it looked like a 3-4. So they could very easily get into those same principles. So yes, they could in theory stay a 4-3. I would think, based on how effective the Vikings were at this stuff last year, he would probably prefer to stay in a 3-4 if they're going to try to do the same stuff. But they could in theory stay in a 4-3. I think even if they stay in a 4-3, it's going to be very similar to what we saw last year, where it's still 3 defensive linemen and an edge defender, and then they'll probably move a linebacker down like a Frankie Louvu to the edge or something like that. So if you're going to be doing that anyway, you might as well call it a 3-4 and actually try to find a guy that, like a Van Ginkel, that can play on the edge and rush on the edge, but also drop back into coverage probably a little bit more effectively than a guy like Frankie Louvu does. So I think that answered that question, hopefully. But yeah, so I think that's where that would be going. So I was talking about the coverage on this, and I mentioned about how they knew the blitz scheme that they were going to use was going to force the back to stay into protection, and that is something that Brian Flores is an expert at, and Jones will hopefully have picked up some of. And we'll see from this split scheme why they're so effective at it. And what you're going to have here is you have the line is slightly slanted more towards the left side of the offensive line. So you've got your nose tackle is in between the left guard and the center. You've got a defensive tackle, a 3 technique on the outside shoulder of the left guard. You've got an edge rusher outside the left tackle, and you've got one guy outside here. So typically, when you get this kind of a front slided towards that side, if the offense is in some sort of slide protection, you're going to get the guard and the center sliding to the left side to block those 3, leaving the right tackle one-on-one, which means if you blitz off of this side, this running back's responsible for it, and he's going to have to come and pick that guy up, right? So if they weren't in a slide protection, they might identify this guy as a blitzer, but because they're going to be in a slide protection, this running back's going to have to step up and pick him up. So what you'll see as we run this through, you can see that defensive tackle stunts. You get that line slide, the 4 guys going to the 3 defensive linemen, the biggest threats, which means when this linebacker blitzes, this running back can't release freely. He has to step up and pick up this block. And this will have come from scouting the Eagles and knowing in these situations they use slide protections, and we can force them into that slide protection by this certain alignment and this certain stunt. And that means we can blitz this linebacker in this zone scheme to force that running back to come and pick up that block. Now, that running back does a pretty decent job and he's able to get the throw, but you can see the reasoning behind it is sound. And it speaks to the level of detail that goes into the designs of the blitzes from Flores and why he's so effective at the blitzing. So that is kind of a little look at the blitzing. I think we'll go fully into the blitzing now, which is the fun part. And we'll start with the cover zero because that is where that's what everyone associates with Brian Flores and the Vikings. And we did a live show after the Vikings game where we talked about how Jaden Daniels helped held up against the Vikings pressures, and we'll see some of those. We'll come back to some of those in a minute, but we'll start with Brian Flores blitzes cover zero at any given time, whether it's 1st and 10, first play of the game, whether it's 4th and goal from the 1 with time expiring, any time in between, any situation in between, he will blitz cover zero. Obviously, Jones is not Brian Flores, so he might not be quite so aggressive, but I would expect to see some of these things from him. So this is a random, I think this was 2nd and 10 in the Cowboys game from sort of midfield, not necessarily a moment that you would associate with let's blitz cover zero. But of course, it's Brian Flores. So we've got 7 defenders up on the line of scrimmage. We've got man-to-man outside. It's cover zero. We're going to send the house. We're going to force the issue. We're going to make them go quick. And of course, that means we get a free rusher off the edge. For anyone that doesn't know, cover zero is every eligible, if I wind this back, every eligible receiver is given a defender in coverage. So we can see here, this corner is eligible for this receiver. This corner is covering this guy. This safety is covering this guy. This corner is covering this guy. Someone will also be responsible for the running back. But as we talked about before, when you blitz so many times, the running back usually has to stay in to protect. And what this does is there's no safety in the middle of the field. No safeties back deep at all. Everyone's on the line of scrimmage and everyone's blitzing. And what that means is the defense can guarantee they can rush one more guy than what the offense has in to protect. So you've got 7 guys on the line of scrimmage here. You've got 5 offensive linemen and a running back. They can only block 6 guys. So you should get 1 free rusher. Now, if you don't hit this properly, you can get those guys all blocked. But they do hit this properly, and you get a guy free off the edge. And what that does is that forces the issue. The quarterback then has to become responsible for this edge rusher that's free off the edge that they can't block. And they have to do that by basically throwing the ball quickly, either making them miss with some sort of amazing juke, but typically these quarterbacks aren't as good athletes as these edge rushers, or more often you have to try to beat them with the throw. But when you get a guy in your face coming free, it's really hard to make these quick throws and make them accurately, and that means that a corner has a chance to jump those routes. And obviously you can see here this edge rusher, I think it's Van Ginkel, is quite smart. He jumps up, you can see that throw is coming, so he gets his arms high, and it makes it really hard for him to throw over him. You have to kind of drop that arm angle and make a really awkward throw around him. And what that means is you get this kind of weird, kind of lofty pass, which the corner is able to kind of jump and get his hand in at the catch point and break up.
And Mark, this is what I'm excited about in DC. I think like with an aggressive type of defense like this, again, cover zeros, to the uber degree of being aggressive, but I like it because I feel like it forces the offense to make quick decisions, right? Their only reprieve from this blitz, from this coverage, would be either, a quick short pass to the flat, or maybe a bomb trying to get the ball down the field, kind of a quick decision, but it seems like it's a rush decision, which maybe can make them more prone to mistakes potentially. So I kind of like a defense. It's more of a dictating type.
Exactly. And we're going to get to all of what you just said in the next few clips here. So this one is another cover zero. This time it's 3rd and 9 down in the red zone. So it's 3rd down, and in the red zone is you would more typically associate with playing cover zero. But that's what you see here. It's a completely different situation. But again, Flores is more than happy to show the cover zero look and run it. And Dak kind of feels this as cover zero is actually coming this time. He tries to back away, but this pressure all just gets through pretty quickly, and he's forced into a quick throw. He does actually manage to complete this pass, but the corner is able to break on it quickly, and they're able to stop him. And obviously that's 5-6 yards short of the first down marker, and the Cowboys had to kick a field goal. So as you said, it's a very aggressive style, and it is very forceful. It is playing on the front foot, and it is trying to force the issue. But there is a little bit more nuance to it. The thing that makes Brian Flores so good at it, and again, we do have to separate that there's Flores and Jones are 2 different coaches.
100%.
And Washington's not getting Flores, they're getting Jones. But you hope that there are some of these smaller and more important details are things that Jones has picked up on, because Jones wasn't just the defensive backs coach, he was the pass game coordinator. And when you're the pass game coordinator, you have to be able to tie in the fact that Flores has got all these blitzes, and you have to find some sort of coverage answer behind it. So what we're going to see here is a 2-play sequence from the Washington game from earlier this season. So this first play is during a 2-minute drill, it's 2nd and 5 or something like that. They show this cover zero look, And what they do is they put this safety in the middle of the field, making them think that, oh, we might actually bail out of this cover zero because this safety's in the middle of the field. If it was real cover zero, he'd be tighter to Zach Ertz. Otherwise, we just hit a quick hitch route. So this is a disguised cover, somewhat of a disguised cover zero, because this safety's so far off Ertz that it makes Jaden Daniels and the offense think, oh, they're actually going to bail out of this, because otherwise, why would they leave Ertz in so much space? But they don't. They blitz cover zero and they go all out, and Jaden Daniels is like, oh crap, they're all blitzing. I panic, and he just throws it kind of at the feet of Terry McLaurin. But you notice there, he looked at Zach Ertz, and Zach Ertz has quite a different bit of space between him and that safety. That throw was probably on at that point. So a few plays later, again, we'll see it here, he does look at Zach Ertz quickly, and that throw is probably there. But he then feels like, oh, wait, this is actually cover zero. And it causes panic, as you said. It forces the issue, and he ends up throwing it at the feet of Jaden Daniels. So a few plays later, they go back to that exact same look, and it looks exactly like the play we just saw, where we've got all those guys up on the line of scrimmage. We've got man-to-man on the outside, and we have that safety that was responsible for Ertz on the previous play in the middle of the field, leaving what looks like that space for them to hit that pass to Zach Ertz. But this is all just bait. So this play came 2 plays later, right? And so this is bait to make them think, oh, we've got that same look. I can actually hit that quick slant to Zach Ertz with that safety dropping so far off. But what they're actually doing is setting a trap. And they're having this defense. I think this is a defensive tackle, or maybe it's a linebacker. He's going to step up like he's going to rush, and then he's going to stink out late into that throwing window. And you can see he sinks out into that throwing window. If Jaden Daniels had just been focusing purely on Zach Ertz, thinking, I've got that matchup, I'm going to hit that, and try to throw it, that linebacker is going to be right in that throwing window to at least break it up, if not be a threat to intercept it. Now, fortunately, Jaden Daniels took a better decision and threw an out route to Terry McLaurin. He still didn't hit it, but it was a safer throw. But that's the kind of level. There's levels to this. Anyone can just say, we're going to
much nuance. Yeah,
we can run covers. Anyone can run cover zero, but to lay the traps on one play for another play 2 plays later, it's very much the defensive equivalent of what we see like a Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan doing, where they layer their concepts, where it's on one play we'll run a wide zone from this look with 2 tight ends and a receiver going in jet sweep motion, and on the next play we'll show the exact same formation and motion and stuff, but we'll actually run a play action pass off of it. This is essentially that exact same thing. It's
fantastic. It's filthy disguise. And while I was going through my mind, Mark, is that a separate play call, or is that a learning principle? Like, hey, if you see this set again, I advise a linebacker or defensive end to potentially, improvise pre-snap. Like, what do you think in your best guesstimation? I know you're not in the room.
Sure. Yeah. No, they certainly have cover zero looks where they will give those guys freedom to jump out. But the alignment of that safety kind of gave it away, right? When we saw it in that first look, like if we go back to those Cowboys cover zeros, right? You can see here, these guys, there's no safety kind of in the middle of the field way off of a guy, right? They're all fairly tightly aligned. Whereas when we go back to this first one from Washington, you can see that safety is way off. He's like 10 or 15 yards off the line of scrimmage and in the middle of the field rather than tight to Ertz. So that's a deliberate trap that's being laid. And you can see in this one, they all rush. Whereas in the next one, this guy peels out and directly into that throwing lane where they're setting that trap. So this one, I think, was a designed kind of trap that they're trying to set. They definitely do have cover zero plays where they have these smart players that they know if they're getting blocked, they can just drop off into coverage, and as soon as they get there, kind of the guard to commit to them, then they can drop off into coverage late and be a threat that way. But this one felt like a design trap given on the position of this safety.
Interesting. Okay. It's impressive. If that's the case, it's very impressive. Yeah. It's very nuanced.
Exactly. And so those are the layers to it that make Brian Flores so good. and we'll have to wait and see whether Jones can implement those level of layers, or whether he even wants to, because it is an extremely aggressive style. Hopefully he does, because it is a very fun style as well. But we'll see. So as you kind of mentioned, the defense, this style of defense is very front foot, and it very much forces the issue. And there's only so many answers that offenses can have to that. And as you said, one of those is kind of taking a deep shot. And this is a good and a bad thing. From a defensive perspective, you know it's going to be one of a few things, so you can be prepared for that. But it is still, like this one here, we see the Vikings get up into cover zero, and Jaden Daniels knows that. So he sees he's got one-on-one on the outside here. He makes a little signal to, I think this is Noah Brown. He's like, okay, you switch, you run a fade. At which point, this is just a one-on-one matchup, right? So this corner, if he's not very good in press coverage or whatever, he can get beat. And in this situation, Jaden Daniels drops back. Yes, they get the free rusher up the middle, but he stays poised and he trusts Noah Brown to win. And Noah Brown gets kind of dragged down by that defender who's getting beat.
Pass interference.
It's a pass interference call, exactly. So it can lead to explosive plays in that regard. So there is risk involved, there is downside, but you know that's going to be one of the main answers. Another one of the main answers is you're going to see a lot of quick passes like this, where you'll just run a quick out to the sideline, and this guy is out leverage. He's got to try to break down on that. You don't, very rarely would you see this be kind of a match principle where this guy would take the out route and this guy would take inside the outside receiver, because it's cover zero. It's hard to do that. So it's pure man to man. So that means he's going to run this quick out. They're going to make that quick catch, and then you've got a really tough assignment. You've got one guy trying to cover this guy in space, and he's got to make this tackle. And if you have good tacklers, then that great. But if you have a really elusive receiver, or you take a slightly bad angle, as you see here, you can miss that tackle, and suddenly a 3-yard out turns into a 7 or 8 yard gain and a first down. So
yeah, you illustrated that beautifully. Like that's what I was thinking as well. Like the 4-foot defense that you're talking about, that aggressive defense, it dictates the offense and kind of pigeonholes them into what they can do, either a quick flat or a deep shot. However, you have to be disciplined, and you have to be able to control that, to suppress that, or a big play, a big impact play would happen. Like Washington has to be pretty disciplined on that tackling right there, or become it could be a 3-yard play or a 20-yard play, depending on the tackle right there.
Yeah, exactly. And this is another example of it, right? This is another thing that you will get. And this was from Washington, where you get that cover zero look, but outside here you can see there is a lot of space. This is 3rd and 14, but even on 3rd and 14 against this cover zero look, Jaden Daniels goes, okay, we can check to a little quick screen to Deebo Samuel. He makes his little signal. You can see that the blocking angles are really good. You can get Zach Ertz pinning this guy inside. You can get the Terry McLaurin blocking the receiver on the edge. Suddenly you've just got this safety that's got to try to make up this ground for Deebo. And you can just throw a quick screen out to the flat, and suddenly you've got blockers set up and a pathway to the first down marker with a safety deep. Even though they had guys bailing out of this cover zero, it wasn't a pure cover zero with everyone rushing. You're still able to go and pick up that first down. So there is downside, there is risk. Like that was a 3rd and 14 conversion, which how many times have we seen Washington convert 3rd and 14 in recent
Not that
years,
many
right?
this year. Yeah, but go ahead.
And the flip side of that is, how many times have we seen Washington's defense drop 8 players into coverage and still give up 3rd and 14, right?
Exactly.
So it is. I still prefer them being on the front foot, and I think a lot of fans will prefer them being on the front foot.
I agree.
But when you talk about from a defensive perspective, those are the risks involved, and to mitigate those risks, you need sound tacklers, as we talked about, and it helps to have really smart players like this. Andrew Van Ginkel, I've mentioned him a couple times. He makes this defense work a lot. So this was the same check that Jaden Daniels we just saw. This happened later in the game. Again, they show this cover zero look. Again, we've seen it a number of times already from this Washington game. And I don't know whether they checked this or called this, but it's the same screen that we just saw to Deebo on that 3rd and 14. They do the same thing. But Andrew Van Ginkel is such a smart player. He recognizes the alignment, and this time he's like, okay, I know what you're doing. You're running a screen to Deebo. Instead of rushing, which is what his responsibility is, he recognizes that Debo is running that same screen, so he peels off from his rush and he goes and gets in the way of Debo Samuel. He said, "You're not throwing the screen to Debo until we can get guys over there to block it." Once Jaden starts taking off running, then he'll be like, "Okay, well, I am actually meant to be containing on that side," so he peels off and tries to make that rush. But by that point, you've got multiple defenders coming over to help rally to the ball. You've got blockers being getting through blocks, and you go and make that tackle, and you keep it to in fact, they lost a couple yards on that play.
I mean, for me, that's so impressive. I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg. It seems like Minnesota's playing sound, smart football, right? So they either have sound, smart players, or there's really great teaching where they're very highly educated and they know what they're doing. I'm guessing it's the latter, right? I feel like everyone's pretty talented in the NFL and you need good coaching, and hopefully we can bring some good discipline to Washington. I know this play right here is going to make me so mad, Mark, to watch it, but we're going to go through it step by step. My question to you, though, is I mean, I guess the only comparable player that we even have on the team right now would be, I guess, Frankie Luvu could potentially play this role, but he doesn't have, I mean, I don't want to appreciate him, but like he couldn't be, like, it would be a leap for him to kind of play at this level for next year, right?
Yeah, I agree. They definitely don't have an Andrew Van Ginkel, and you can play this scheme without an Andrew Van Ginkel type. But it sure helps to have a really smart guy like that can recognize that, hey, this is the same screen I just saw a minute ago. I'm going to go peel off and take it away and stop them from getting 14 yards like they did on the previous time. And this time they're going to lose yards because I'm a smart player. And this play is another example of it. It's the same kind of situation where it's cover zero and Jaden Daniels is again checking to the screen. Clearly, that, as we talked about, when you're an offense facing this kind of aggressive defense, there's only so many things you can check to. It's either going to be a shot or some sort of quick game or a quick screen like this. So that's clearly the Commanders' game plan, was to check to these quick screens and try to hit them and try to hit an explosive play. As we saw with the Debo one earlier, it can work. But when you have a super smart guy like Andrew Van Ginkel, you do it a little bit too often. You try to go to that well a little bit too often, and Van Ginkel's going to recognize, hey, we're running another screen here. We've checked to another screen. I'm just going to go jump in that passing lane and intercept that pass, tip it up,
great play,
and run it back. And Jaden unfortunately gets knocked over and takes his injury that knocks him out the rest of the year. But it was an incredibly good play. So yeah, it's definitely one of the key elements to this offseason. I think if you're going to try to play such an aggressive style, finding really smart players like a Van Ginkel, like a Harrison Smith makes that defense tick as well. From the safety position, you have those guys that understand, hey, we're playing front foot aggressive style, and we know that they're only going to do so many different things, but those things can hurt us, so we need to find ways to mitigate that. And so Van Ginkel making those kind of plays are really heads up, and Washington could use with finding someone like that. I don't think they have someone like that on the roster currently.
And just want to say thank you to Sean, thank you to Eastwood for jumping in on the comments. There's been a couple comments regarding Cam Madron. I don't know how much you deep dived and looked into him, Mark, over the past over the past couple years.
Sure.
Sorry, the last year. And then Eastwood said Eric Wilson was a huge key for their defensive linebacker. He's a free agent. I always find it interesting when you bring a new defensive coordinator over. Is he going to bring position coaches with him? Is he going to bring players with him? It's always kind of interesting to see who comes over. So that's definitely want to keep an eye on. Thank you, Eastwood.
Yeah, I think Madrano is an interesting one because he has the athletic profile that you would look for, and he has the coverage skills that you would look for to play linebacker in this situation. And maybe he's someone that could become somewhat of a pass rushing option in that kind of Van Ginkel, technically an outside linebacker, but drops off into coverage probably more than he rushes. So he would fit that profile. The main thing with Madrano is that tackling is a big issue for him, and it was in college, and you could see it in preseason last year where he has a tendency to dive at guys' feet and doesn't wrap up properly. He doesn't hit them at the hip and kind of bring them down that way. And as we've just kind of seen with this defense, if you're going to play this aggressive front foot style, you're going to have to be able to tackle in space. And so if he can't be trusted to tackle, then the rest of it is irrelevant. So we'll see on him. If he can improve his tackling, then he is someone that has the athletic profile to fit well in this defense. But until he can prove that he can be a reliable tackler, I'm not he's not too
Optimistic.
high
Yeah, I
on
feel
the
like
radar.
he's a little bit. Yeah, I think he's a little bit further away, right? If he was showing potential signs, but may have been playing more by the end of the year. We'll see if he grows over the summer.
Yeah. In terms of Wilson, yeah, absolutely. That would essentially be the same kind of thing as Dan Quinn and Ken Norton bringing in Bobby Wagner to that their Mike linebacker. Wilson would essentially be the same thing, slightly younger, but also still, I think he's 31 or 32, so he's not going to be a long-term option. But if you want your Mike linebacker to help transition the defense to that new scheme, that would make a lot of sense. I would imagine the Vikings probably want to keep hold of him as well. So we'll see if he actually hits the open market, and we'll see whether Washington wants to go kind of. Do we trust Jordan McGee? Do we want to draft someone? Exactly what they want to do there. So
quick question for you, Mark. Would Bobby Wagner be extremely out of place in this type of defense?
He'd do really well at the stuff going forward. He wouldn't do so well at the stuff going backwards. And the whole point of this defense is you don't need elite pass rushers in this defense because you're going to get the pressure from the blitz schemes and you're going to get good matchups. Like you're going to get a linebacker, as we're about to see, you're going to get linebackers on running backs. You're going to get edge rushers on tight ends. So you're going to get free rushers from cover zero. So you don't need that elite edge rusher type. And when you look at the Vikings roster, they don't have a Myles Garrett, right? What they have is a lot of guys that are very well-rounded, that any one of those guys is capable of dropping off into coverage and playing coverage, and they're also very capable, if you rush them, of beating blocks. They're not bad rushers, but none of them are a Myles Garrett or a Micah Parsons type of rusher. So you need to be well-rounded in this defense, and Bobby Wagner could do the going forward stuff really well, but a lot of people could do the going forward stuff really well. It's the going backward stuff and the match coverage stuff, and that is stuff that we've seen in the last 2 years. Bobby Wagner has been declining in his coverage ability. So so we looked at some cover zero stuff. There is more to Brian Flores and hopefully Daronte Jones than just cover zero. And they get to a lot of different blitzes, a lot of different blitz schemes. One I thought I'd highlight is these kind of read schemes where this is from a cover zero look, and you'll see quite a lot of their blitz schemes do come from a cover zero look because it helps disguise everything. Because at this point, you're not going to know who's rushing, who's not. You have to have a plan for everyone rushing, and you have to have a plan for only 3 or 4 of them rushing. But what you're going to have here is you're going to have these 2 guys on the edge. They're going to drop off into coverage. You're going to have 3 down linemen are all going to rush, and then you've got these 2 linebackers in the A gap. And what they're doing is they're running a read blitz. So both of them, either one of them could potentially blitz. They're going to read how the center slides. So if the center slides right, this guy's going to drop off into coverage, and this guy's going to blitz, and that would force the running back to step up and block him. If the center slides left, which is what happens on this occasion, this linebacker, he's going to step forward, see the center is going to slide towards him, and then drop off into coverage. And again, what this does is this forces the running back to step up and block this guy. So I talked earlier about how they are very, very good at forcing the running back to stay in to protect, and this is one of the ways they do it. And again, it limits the amount of eligible receivers that are actually running routes. So it means you can do the kind of blitzes and still play zone behind it. But it also forces these running backs into blocking linebackers, which, as I said, like Bobby Wagner could be really good at this. Frankie Luvu could be really good at this, but a lot of linebackers could be really good at taking on a running back in pass protection. So you'll see that here. And actually, to be fair, Chris Rodriguez does a really nice job here. But the point is how they get the matchup. So you can see Tyler Biadasz slides to the left. So this guy immediately peels off, which means Chris Rodriguez has to step up and block this linebacker while this one drops into coverage. So you get the numbers in coverage. It's still only a 4-man rush, but you've then forced the running back to stay in to protect, which means you forced 6 guys into protect against 4, and you get a nice matchup of the running back on the linebacker one-on-one. Now, Chris Rodriguez, as I said, does a really nice job taking out that linebacker and keeping this pocket clean for Jaden Daniels. But because they've shown that illusion of a covered zero look, and they've suddenly bailed out into this coverage, Jaden Daniels doesn't really have any option to go to, and he has to force this or take his check down to Ben Sinnott, and they still get a positive play out of it, but it was more to show the design of the play, We don't need to look the coverage aspect of it. So that was one option where they show the read kind of option of it. This one is a little bit later. It's the exact same look, and these guys all drop out. And this time you get still just a 4-man rush, but these 2 defensive tackles are going to widen to occupy both the guards and the tackles, which again forces the running back to step up, and the center and the running back then have to deal with a stunt. And this is a really, really hard thing for an offensive line to pick up, because a running back, typically they're looking at a linebacker and they're like, that's my guy, I've got to go pick him up. To then have to worry about this kind of cross stunt, it's really, really hard for a running back. They don't have to typically deal with this. And Jeremy McNichols does this about as well as you could possibly expect a running back to deal with this. So as you can see, as we run this on, everyone else drops out into coverage, and you can get these defensive tackles engage with the guard and then widen to the offensive tackles, which then forces Biotish and McNichols to work basically 2-on-2 against these linebackers. And you're going to get Biotish slides to the left like he did before, and he picks up that initial block, but this linebacker is going to go run into Biotish's hip to be part of the pick stunt. And you'll see that McNichols was initially working to that linebacker thinking, I've just got to pick up that linebacker. And suddenly his assignment changes, and suddenly the other linebacker loops over the top, and he's gone from trying to block one linebacker to trying to block the other. Now, we see offensive linemen do these pass-offs all the time. You don't see a running back do these pass-offs very often.
He did a great job.
And he did a great job here. Like, it comes late, but he manages to keep his feet moving, keep his hand on, and keep him engaged. And he does just enough to delay him to let Jaden Daniels step up in the pocket and avoid that pressure. So that's a really, really good job by a running back. And Tyler Biotish, to be fair to him, also did a pretty good job on his block, and we highlighted that when we talked about the Vikings game a few weeks ago. But that, again, shows the stress that these kind of blitzes can do. It was only a 4-man rush, but you've generated the matchups from the scheme, and it worked really well. Again, we don't need to see the coverage stuff because I know we're running at an hour. I don't know whether you want to do the last couple plays that I've got, or whether
we're not do speed through.
Sure. So we've got. So we just saw those read blitzes with 2 linebackers in the A gap. You'll quite often hear the double A or double mug front, and they certainly do that a lot, where they have those linebackers doing that read blitz. But on this one against the Eagles, you get the exact same principle, but you just change the look. So this time, instead of having the linebackers both in the A gaps, you have the linebackers in the B gaps between the guards and the tackles. But you get the same principle. So you're reading which way the line's going to slide. So if the line slides to the right and the running back slides that way, this guy's going to blitz to get matched up on the running back, and this guy's going to drop off into coverage. What happens here is the line slides to the left, so this guy drops off into coverage, this guy blitz and gets matched up on the running back. And we'll run this through and you'll see it. You get that line slides to the left, so this guy's reading it. He can see the line sliding towards him, so he drops into coverage. He joins the rush on this side against the running back, gets that matchup, and does a nice job working through that running back and getting some pressure on Jalen Hurts, who manages to avoid it, but then the rest are able to rally up to him and make the tackle. And you can see behind that, I talked earlier about how they drop into zone behind all these different kind of coverages, all these different types of blitzes. And you'll see that again here. You get some quarters coverage principles where you get the backside corner locking up man-to-man on this guy. So when you think of an outside corner, like Trey Amos is really good at the match stuff because he played a year at Alabama, so he knows those match stuff. But you still want a guy that can play man-to-man for these kind of looks where you get 3 receivers to one side and 1 receiver to the other. He ends up basically locking up man-to-man because this safety has to go and poach this receiver on this side to balance out the numbers. So and then that gives you essentially what we talked about earlier, where you get that triangle 3/2 on this side. So you get that safety coming across to poach this guy. You get that 3/2 triangle on this side, and then you just get a man-to-man lock on this backside guy. And it works out quite nicely. Again, it's zone match coverage principles behind a 5-man blitz, which you don't see very often in the NFL.
One of the first things you and Nick ever taught me when we were doing our film room for a couple of years ago, it's all about geometry, it's all about numbers, right? So that little triangle kind of, locking things down the right side of the field.
Exactly. And so we'll do one more here, which is just another example of the same thing. So this time the Eagle is the exact same play from a blitz perspective. The Eagles are in a slightly different protection because the back's on the other side. but it's the exact same look. So you've got both linebackers in the B gaps rather than the A gaps, but they're both doing the same responsibility of reading which way the line's sliding. But once again, the line's going to slide to the left. So this guy's going to drop out. This guy's going to rush and get matched up on that running back yet again. You can see that here. He runs over him this time and once again gets some pressure on Hurts and eventually ends up getting that sack. And then behind it, I can't remember what coverage they played behind it, but I think it was, again, some sort of zone. Yeah, it was much more, you can see much more of a quarters shell with 4 deep defenders, and you get those 2 guys peeling off to those underneath bits. And you can see, there you go, you got that quarter shell with the zone match stuff behind it, and Hurts gets sacked. So yeah, hopefully that's kind of a good overview of hopefully what we'll see from Jones. We're going to see kind of a change in a front, probably to a 3-4. They will hopefully be able to find their version of an Andrew Van Ginkel that can play on the edge and can drop into coverage. From a coverage perspective, expect to see a lot of match quarters principles, certainly zone matching principles, but I would assume probably in the quarters sort of tree of coverages. And that's something that Jones kind of specialized in from being working under Vance Joseph for so long. So I would definitely expect that. And then hopefully we'll see that kind of front foot aggressive blitzing stuff that Flores was so good at, and hopefully some of that has rubbed off on Jones, and he's able to replicate some of that here. So hopefully from a schematic standpoint, I think it's quite an exciting hire. But obviously scheme is only does you so much, and you need the personnel to be able to run it. So we'll see in the coming weeks what they're able to do personnel-wise.
Yeah, you know that. I think it's going to be, just watching the film, I'm personally excited. That Brian Flores, the type of defense, that tree is very exciting, because I think here in Washington, we've seen more of a reactive defense over the past couple of years. I think people would be okay if we go out swinging, for lack of better words, if we are aggressive, if we are trying to dictate the offense, if we are trying to create some chaos. I think they're willing to kind of have some mistakes as long as it's aesthetically pleasing and could potentially change the the outcomes of the offense. I think Mikey Sanderson could potentially thrive in here because he's more of a read and react type of corner. I think he does tackle pretty good in space. He did kind of have some tough times last year, passing off and communicating. So that is something that we have to see with Washington. And I do think that we need to have some sort of, I think now that we have our defensive coordinator, it's going to be interesting to see what type of free agents we pursue, what rookies we draft, because you do have to match people that goes along with your styles and your scheme. That being said, Mark, I know it's early, but we have a question from Sean, because I do want to respect our viewers as well. Sean talked about, do you think potentially, I know it's kind of early in the process, do you think Caleb Downs would be potentially a good fit? Just for context, he plays nickel, boundary corners, box safety. Do you think it's kind of more his direction, or do you would an edge would be a better fit immediately, or best immediate impact for this defense next year?
So I haven't done a huge amount of work on Caleb Downs yet. I have watched a few games, and the idea of what people would say Caleb Downs is would be a very good fit for what they want to do defensively, especially as we saw those kind of 3 safety packages. He could definitely play multiple roles within that style of defense. So that certainly, I can't speak to if I think Caleb Downs is that type of player, but certainly the way people talk about him, from what they say, if he is that type of player, then yes, he would be a really good fit, and certainly very much in play at 7. Possibly more than an edge rusher, because as we talked about, the edge rushers don't need to be star pass rushers in this scheme. You don't need Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons on the edge. You can have one of those guys, and you can fit the scheme around that, but you can also get by with a guy like an Andrew Van Ginkel that's more smart and very much capable of playing in coverage and dropping off, and your pressure is going to come from the blitzes and the overloads and attacking protection schemes and getting inside linebackers blitzing against running backs like we saw. So that's where the pressure is going to come from. It's not going to come from, we're just going to rush 4 and trust our best pass rusher to go win one-on-one. That's not the scheme that they're going to run. So absolutely, and edge is still absolutely in play, just because they do need more pass rush, and you still have times where you're going to rush 4, but you're primarily looking at a defense that's going to be much more aggressive, much blitz a lot more, so you don't necessarily need that guy. Obviously, that guy would help still, and as I say, you can scheme around it. But finding a Van Ginkel and a safety that can help dictate stuff on the back end might be a better fit. I can't speak specifically to Caleb Downs because I've not watched him enough. But if he is what people say he is, then that would probably spring him up the board. I would think for Washington at 7.
No, it makes a lot of sense. So basically, what you're saying is, with this type of defense, if it does convert from Flores to Jones over to DC, it's more of a production type of pressure because from the scheme, from the blitzes, from the types of overloads. It doesn't necessarily have to be an individual player that's going to dominate. It's always beneficial to have the individual player, but it's going to be more produced by our scheme and things of that nature. And then also, go ahead.
Yeah, if you just look at like the Vikings like sack numbers, like they were like 4th or 3rd or something in the league in sacks.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think anyone had more than like 7 or 8. But they had a bunch of guys on like 4 or 5 because it just comes from all the different guys that blitz at any given time. So it's not like, again, they didn't have a Myles Garrett that came in and had 25 sacks or whatever insane number he had this year. It was spread amongst the different guys that they have from those scheming up those matchups and overloading sides and that kind of thing.
Yeah, very good. And then on top of that, like having a smart safety in the back end could potentially help out with communication issues and preventing the breakdown. So I can see where you're coming from there. That being said, thank you, Mark. That was an awesome breakdown. I definitely learned a lot. Thank you to everyone that was in the chat that contributed. You definitely helped lead the conversation, which we greatly appreciate. We love it when you guys jump in. Also, thanks to the 786 people that watch us live over this last hour and 10 minutes. We greatly appreciate it. We're here every Wednesday. We aim for about 4 o'clock every week. But, obviously work schedules come up. I'll keep, follow us on, Mark Bullock NFL on X, on Twitter. Follow his Substack. Follow me at GCarmy21 on Twitter. We'll be here every Wednesday doing some all 22. We have some David Blau stuff in our back pockets. We have some draft prospects in our back pockets. We have a lot of things that are upcoming over the next month or so. So definitely reach out to us if you have any ideas. And thank you for everything, guys. See you guys next week. Peace.